Hello guys, welcome back to my channel and enjoy this fanfic part 2. Now let's start the fanfic. Iruka arrived home from his job at the missions room to find that Naruto had not arrived, and Hinata was on the verge of going out to look for her. It's been almost an hour. Worried Ayame. Iruka frowned. Naruto is never late, which is why we're worried, Hinata said quietly. She'd gotten over her stutter, and blushed less. Naruto had helped her with that as they trained together, sometimes with Neji. Iruka frowned again, and rubbed the scar on the bridge of his nose. His wife, Ayame, the daughter of Tsuki, the owner of Ichiraku Ramen, bit her lip. I hope nothing happened to her, seeing as yesterday was, she trailed off nervously. Yesterday? Asked Inuzuka Hana, Kiba's older sister. What's the significance of yesterday? Iruka's eyes widened a little. The festival. I hope no one got to her. Hana swore under her breath. I forgot about her birthday. The brown-haired man made his way to the door, saying, I'll go look for her. Halfway across the hall, though, a loud knock sounded on the door. Iruka rushed to the door and yanked it open to show a sheepish Naruto standing there in a simple loose long-sleeved orange t-shirt and gray long pants. Sorry I'm late, she said. Got carried away doing laundry. Which was true, she'd been washing her bloodied sheets and clothes. She had woken up at noon, sore all over, and had to take a long bathe to get rid of the stench that seemed to stick to her skin, and then she had done her laundry. Iruka placed a hand on her shoulder and pulled her in, shutting the door behind her. He didn't notice her wince at his grasp. You made us worried, Naruto. How could you forget about something as important as this? He chided her. She just laughed sheepishly, murmuring a, Sumimasen, sensei. Ayame and Hana latched onto her and propelled her into the spare bedroom in the house, dragged Hinata in, and kicked Iruka out when he tried to make sure Naruto was alright. They locked the door the moment they tried to enter again. Change into this, Naruto-kun, Hinata said, holding up a bundle of white and orange cloth. She handed the white cloth to Naruto first. Taking it from the Hyuga, the blonde found it was a white under-kimono. She grimaced a little, not being overly fond of women's kimonos. Biting her lip, she draped the under-kimono over Hinata's head, making her splutter and Hana laugh, and shucked off her t-shirt and pants. She was used to being with other boys when she had been a boy, so she hadn't any qualms about undressing in front of girls. What's the matter, Hinata-chan? She teased when she noticed her friend blushing. You have everything I have. Hana laughed again. Ayame caught sight of something sparkling brilliantly on Naruto's wrist. Wow, she exclaimed. That is a beautiful bracelet, Naruto. The other girls oohed and awed at it, and Hana caught Naruto's wrist and dragged her closer to examine the bracelet. My best friend gave it to me for my birthday, she explained, a small, fond smile on her face. Hinata noticed something else on the Naruto's arms. And it seemed they weren't only on the arms. She quickly dispelled the weak genjutsu covering them. Naruto, are those bruises and scabs? She asked, coming closer to the blonde, who was dressed in only her bra and panties. Naruto quickly moved away from the woman. They're nothing, really, Hinata-chan, she said quickly. A little too quickly, it seemed, because Hana frowned and pulled her even nearer. Those are fresh, Naruto. Even for someone who heals as fast as you, I can tell they're fresh wounds. What happened? She asked, gripping the blonde's shoulder to prevent her from moving away, then quickly releasing her grasp as Naruto winced. Hana noticed bruises and scabs along her arms as well. They're nothing. Nothing happened, she insisted, grabbing the under-kimono from Hinata and putting it on quickly. She sat on the bed as she clumsily tried to arrange the folds of the cloth. Naruto-kun, Hinata gasped. Your scalp has traces of dried blood. Naruto frowned, and the girls came closer to inspect it, similar frowns on their faces. The blonde ran a hand through her hair and winced. I thought I had washed out all the blood, she muttered. Hana narrowed her eyes. Naruto, what's the meaning of this? And don't try to tell us it's nothing. Naruto kept quiet and looked away. Hinata sat beside her on the bed and put a hand on her shoulder. Naruto-kun. Naruto sighed. It's nothing, really. It's just something that happens every year, and it'll heal. I've forgotten about it already. She looked up. Can we please get on with the dressing? I was already an hour late. Hana growled. Some people beat you up last night, didn't they? Because of the Kyuubi. Naruto took the orange cloth from Hinata and shook it out. It was a beautiful kimono that started out in her favorite bright shade of orange at the top, and slowly faded into a creamy peach color by the waist, and white at the lower hem. A continuous cloud-like pattern was embroidered in gold thread from lower bust to mid-thigh. On the back and over the left was embroidered a symbol Naruto recognized as a modified Uchiha fan. The original shape of the fan had been retained, but it was now all white in color, and in the middle of the line dividing the two halves of the Uchiha fan was the red Uzumaki spiral. Together, they represented the new Uchiha Uzumaki name. The red of the Uzumaki spiral contrasted well with the white of the Uchiha fan, which in turn stood out on the bright orange of the cloth where the symbol had been stitched. Yes to both questions, Hana-nichan, she muttered, and then continued, disregarding the earlier conversation, at least the kimono is orange. I was so afraid they'd stick me in pink. Can you imagine? Pink. She shuddered, not noticing the look Hana shot at Yame, who quietly slipped out of the room. All right, Naruto, put it on quickly, then we can work on your makeup and hair, Hana instructed briskly, ignoring Naruto's screeching about having to use makeup. The blonde grumbled the whole way through as the girls arranged the folds of the kimono, tied on the obi and started on her hair and makeup. They didn't bring up the issue of her injuries again, though she did notice that they were being extra gentle with her. She thought they had understood her obvious reluctance to discuss the subject. She had noticed Ayame returning to the room with a half-satisfied, half-worried look on her face. The woman just explained that she went to check on Iruka when Naruto questioned her reappearance. Finally, an hour and 15 minutes later, after much protest and grumbling, from Naruto irritated exclamations, Ayame, threats, Hana, and exasperated sighs, Hinata, the bride was finally ready. The other three girls stood back to admire their handiwork. You look beautiful, Naruto, gushed Ayame, wringing her hands in front of her chest. Hana had a big grin on her face, and Hinata was smiling sweetly. I'm a shinobi, I don't do beautiful, Naruto grumbled as she looked away, a slight smile on her face and faint pink on her cheeks. You are beautiful, Naruto-kun, Hinata stated quietly, and stepped forward to take her friend's hands in hers. I really hope you'll be happy with Sasuke, she whispered into Naruto's ears. Naruto's heart clenched, but she turned to Hinata with a smile plastered on her face. It's a mission, and I will do my best for the mission. Feelings and girly desires for affection will not interfere with my mission. Thanks, Hinata-chan, she whispered. Hana slapped her on the back. Don't see what you see in that boy, but I wish you all the best, she said jovially. She also received a plastered-on smile. Ayame steered her out of the room and into the hallway, where there was a full-length mirror. Have a look at yourself, Naruto, she said with a smile. Naruto almost didn't recognize the figure reflected in the glass if it wasn't for the bright yellow hair, cerulean blue eyes and whisker marks on the cheeks. She had insisted they not cover those up, to remind the council, and Sasuke, exactly who she was. She wasn't some girl off the street, or a random kunoichi. She was Uzumaki Kaime Naruto, vessel of the Kyuubi no Kitsune and future Hokage of Konoha. The figure in the mirror had her yellow hair done up in an elaborate bun behind her head that Naruto could feel rather than see. A few yellow strands of hair hung down to frame her face gently. They hadn't used too much foundation or powder, so her light tan was still visible. Her lips were red, a deep, sensuous red that suited her light tan coloration well. The kimono was simple, a thing for which she was very thankful. It wasn't as elaborate as Ayame-nichan's had been during her and Iruka-sensei's wedding. The orange of the kimono suited her well, and she quite liked the way the color faded to white at the bottom. Her new name symbol, it wasn't quite a clan yet, so she refused to call it a clan symbol, stood out on her chest, right over her heart. Bringing up her right hand, she delicately traced the outlines of the fan and the red spiral with 3 fingers. The girls were quiet behind her. Ayame put her hands on Naruto's shoulders from behind. See, Naruto, you are pretty. I wish you a happy marriage as well. The brunette smiled at the reflection. Where's Iruka-sensei? Naruto asked after an awkward moment, on her part, at least wanting to get off the subject. Oh, he went to see Hokage-sama about yo. Ayame cut herself off, and slapped a hand over her mouth. Naruto narrowed her eyes at Ayame's reflection in the mirror, becoming suspicious at the way she'd clammed up. Why did Iruka-sensei need to go see Tsunade Obachan now? Wouldn't he be seeing her later at the wedding? Then it clicked. Naruto spun around. He went to tell Tsunade Obachan about my bruises, didn't he? You told him and he went to tell her. She accused. Ayame tried to say something, but Naruto continued, I told you it was nothing, it's all healed already. I can take care of myself. Just because I'm a girl now doesn't make me weak. Naruto-kun, Hinata started. Naruto, Hana said. Naruto scowled angrily at them, and without another word, Shunshin-ed away. Give me one good reason I shouldn't just string you up by your intestines right now, growled a thoroughly mad Tsunade from her desk. Her killing intent flooded her office, joining the atmosphere already thickened by Jiraiya's, Iruka's and 2 full Anbu squads' killing intent. The 9 men tied up on the floor in front of her cowered, and some began to wet themselves. Iruka had rushed in 1.5 hours earlier, fuming and looking ready to kill someone. The only time Tsunade had seen him like that was when Naruto had been brought in almost dead by Kakashi after her fight with Sasuke at the Valley of the End. He had blurted out how his wife, Hana and Hinata had found multiple fresh injuries on Naruto, and how he suspected she'd received them last night, and why she'd been beaten up, based on yesterday's date. Tsunade had gone pale with fury, and had dispatched 2 Anbu squads, one under Yamato, and another under Neji, a new captain, to find the guilty men, and gotten a messenger to round up Jiraiya at the onsen. They had dragged in the 9 men about 15 minutes ago, finding them easily because they had been boasting about giving the Kyuubi what he deserved. Cowards that were, they had broken down after only 10 minutes of questioning by the Sannin, the Anbu captains, and a furious academy sensei. Tsunade had to admit Iruka had been very intimidating. Probably from his experience dealing with chibi ninjas to be. I should just turn you into a bloody stain on the floor. She shouted, standing to tower over her desk. For 12 years you've been beating up the hero of Konoha, the legacy of the Yondaime, and the future Hokage. You've been torturing the one person I consider to be like a younger sister. She punched her table and a loud crack was heard as a corner of the wood broke off and fell to the floor. FF for forgive us, H Hokage sama. We beg your mercy. Cried one of the men, and the others nodded furiously in agreement. Tsunade snorted. Did you show any mercy to Naruto? Asked Jiraiya coldly. Why should we show any mercy to you? At that, almost all of the men began to wail for mercy. Tsunade massaged her temples. She was very tempted to smash her foot in their faces and grind down hard, and she could tell Jiraiya, Yamato, Neji and Iruka were itching to do damage as well after they'd heard how Naruto had been attacked every October 10th that she'd been in Konoha. Tsunade felt sick to her stomach. Naruto had probably been beaten up only hours after she left her office last night. I'm not inclined to forgive you assholes, she hissed, and the men began to wail louder. Silence. She shouted. Did you know that today is her wedding day? She continued, her voice tight. I'm not going to show any mercy. In fact, since you've broken the Sandame's rule, you should know the punishment that breaking his rule entails. As such, I'm going to sentence you to dia. Tsunade Obachan. Came a shout as the door to her office burst open. The Hokage looked up to see a dressed-up figure in orange fly into the room and stop in front of her. Kaime. Naruto. What are you doing here? Tsunade asked, her anger dissipating somewhat. Ignoring dazed exclamations about her gender by the men on the floor, the younger blonde turned to Iruka. Iruka-sensei, why'd you have to tell Tsunade Obachan? She said angrily. Iruka frowned at her. These men have been abusing you for years, Naruto. It's about time someone did something about it. I would have reported it to the Hokage years ago if I had known. Iruka said vehemently. I'm not a weakling, Iruka-sensei. Shouted Naruto. I can take care of myself. By getting beat up? Questioned Jiraiya in a cold tone. Naruto turned to him. Yes, by getting beat up, she said in a low but intense tone. Because, if they release their frustrations on me, then they won't go beating up someone who might actually die because of what they do. Jiraiya swallowed thickly and turned away from Naruto's intense gaze. Tsunade's voice caught in her throat, and tears started to form in her eyes. Naruto was self-sacrificing, but this was too much. That may be true, Naruto, but you could have reported it to the Hokage yourself and let the law handle them, one of the Anbu spoke up. Naruto recognized Yamato Taiko's voice. I know the Sandame's rule, Yamato Taiko, and I know what the punishment for breaking it is. I can't allow someone to die because they're grieved over losing their precious people to the Kyuubi's attack. How will their families live, then, if their breadwinners are executed? Naruto said in a calmer tone. She had drawn herself up, and was standing straight as she looked Yamato in the eye. Or rather, in the eye holes of his mask. Iruka couldn't help but note how Naruto seemed to radiate authority and compassion even as she stood arguing for the people who abused her. The fancy hairdo, makeup and feminine kimono didn't detract from the obvious charisma she overflowed with. Iruka had never seen her like this, not during the academy, and not during the time after she returned from her training trip with Jiraiya-sama. He had never seen her talk calmly and seriously like this before either. He wondered what else Naruto was hiding. Tsunade sighed. Naruto, you're being too nice. These people have abused you. Had they abused anyone else, they'd be punished as the law dictates. And since they abused you, they will be punished as the law dictates, too. And that punishment is death. They knew that much when they started to even think of laying a finger on you. They were foolish enough to rely on your niceness, but now is their turn to receive their punishment, just like every other criminal. They are responsible for their actions. Every other criminal, Tsunade-sama? Naruto asked. Tsunade winced at her calm tone and respectful address, knowing that the blonde was probably pushing her emotions and pretended idiocy aside to try and rationalize with her. If that is so, then perhaps Uchiha Sasuke should be punished by death for his defection, as well, Naruto continued, narrowing her eyes at Tsunade. Tsunade flushed angrily. Mind your words, Kaime. First of all, it was not my decision to pardon him, and in the way that the pardon was carried out. Secondly, had I sentenced Uchiha to death, you would have definitely come begging me to let him live, she growled. To her surprise, Naruto looked unflustered, and a little pleased, even. Exactly, Tsunade-sama. I would have come begging for you to reconsider had Sasuke been sentenced to death. Aren't I doing the same now? She said. Tsunade didn't answer, and waited for her to continue, which she did, in a gentler tone. Tsunade-sama, you know more than anyone that I truly want to become Hokage. As such, I can't bring myself to allow these men to be put to death over this. Perhaps it was a mistake on my part to not have reported the incidents earlier, but my convictions are such that I love the village, I care for the people the Yondaime gave his life for, and I want to show them that I am not the Kyuubi, merely the vessel. How can I prove that if everyone who acts out their Kyuubi-caused grief and frustration are put to death? The room was quiet. I know I have no say in deciding their punishments, but I would ask that you consider my request to at least stay the death punishment, and punish them in such a way that their ability to provide for their families is not affected. I know what it is like not to have family, not to have a father, or brother, and I do not wish anyone to experience that sorrow because of me. It was so still you could hear a feather drop. Tsunade's brows were furrowed, and she was frowning hard at Naruto. Finally, she sighed and turned to the men on the floor. Listen here, asswipes, she bit out. You'd better thank Naruto she came here in time to stop me from making your punishment official, because then you'd be as good as dead. You worthless scum, people like you are a shame to Konoha. The very person you abuse is the one to stand up for you, because she pities you. Because she cares for your families. Angrily, Tsunade turned to the Anbu. Get them out of my sight. I'll deal with their punishment later. The men, especially the leader, scrambled to their knees and bowed low to Naruto, profuse in their thanks. Think of your precious people before you decide to do something, the younger blonde said quietly. That's what keeps me strong. She nodded to the Anbu. 7 out of the 8 ordered and escorted the men out of the Hokage's office. Naruto recognized the one who stayed as Neji, by his mask. I need to get the floor cleaned, Tsunade muttered, wrinkling her nose as she eyed the area where the men had been. The Hokage sank tiredly into her chair. Looking up, she turned to Naruto. Why didn't you report this, Kaime? She asked angrily. Naruto sighed. I've already stated my reasons, Tsunade-sama. Your reasons are good, but you should still have reported the abuse earlier. What if they decided to torture you even further? Break your bones, or even kill you? Naruto's eyes blazed. I may be a girl now, Tsunade-sama, but I'm not weak, she hissed. I can take care of myself. Tsunade opened her mouth to reply to that, but Neji spoke up quietly. No, you're not weak, Naruto. Just stupid. Naruto trembled in anger as she narrowed her eyes at Neji, who continued, unfazed. Stupid, because you care too much for others to the point you forget to care about yourself. You forget that you are human as well. You forget that even though you are a shinobi, you can still break. You can still end up hurt, physically or mentally. Neji stepped towards the door. You taught me how to care for others again, Naruto. Perhaps it is time you learn to care for yourself. He opened the door. If you'll excuse me, I have a wedding to attend, he said, saying the word, wedding, with slight emphasis, and left. The room was quiet for a while after Neji left. Finally, Jiraiya sighed wearily. It was genjutsu, wasn't it, Naruto? The one that you asked me to teach you during our training. Naruto, whose gaze had become affixed to the floor, nodded silently after a pause. Jiraiya exhaled noisily. I thought so when those scum said they always woke up on the floor, seemingly passed out, after they molested the Kyuubi boy. Iruka frowned and stepped closer to Naruto from where he'd been standing silently by the wall. If you used genjutsu to fool them into thinking they were molesting you, then why didn't you use genjutsu to make them think they were beating you up? Why endure it? Naruto's eyes moved elsewhere but still kept to the floor and didn't answer. Tsunade's heart felt like it dropped into her intestines when she realized the answer. You actually want to be beaten up, don't you, Kaime? She said softly and slowly. Iruka looked incredulously at her. Nani? Tsunade-sama, surely you don't mean that Naruto willingly let herself be tortured? Why would she do that? He trailed off as he seemed to realize the answer to that question. You still feel guilty, don't you? You feel that it's wrong for you to live because of the Kyuubi inside you, right? You felt worse because of that one time the Kyuubi got out of hand and hurt Sakura, Tsunade said, staring anxiously at Naruto, who still didn't say anything. Naruto. Iruka's voice almost broke. He stepped nearer to her and put both his hands on her shoulders. Naruto, you're not responsible for what the Kyuubi did before it got sealed into you. You haven't let the Kyuubi overtake you ever since then. You've become strong by your own effort and strength, not the Kyuubi's. He placed a thumb under Naruto's chin and gently pushed her head up, and felt anger at the hollow look in her eyes. Naruto, listen to me. You are not the Kyuubi. You don't have to be punished for something you didn't do, you hear me? A spark of something flickered in her blue eyes for a second, but overall the hollowness remained. She didn't acknowledge what he had said, even though it had touched her. Tsunade couldn't get her words out, and sat silently behind her desk. Jiraiya stared out the window nonchalantly, but his hands were balled into fists as he crossed his arms over his chest. Iruka sighed. He put a gentle arm around Naruto's shoulders. Tsunade-sama, Jiraiya-sama, I'll bring Naruto to the tower's rooftop in half an hour. I need to get her home first to make sure she's fully ready. Tsunade nodded dumbly. Jiraiya didn't respond. The academy sensei guided Naruto out the office, then Shunshin to his home. Naruto just followed mechanically. The two elders of the council smirked smugly as they observed the wedding ceremony from their seats of honor. The heads of the clans sat with them. Many had been surprised at the union, and most attended out of incredulity and curiosity. The bride seemed demure. Koharu had been worried that she'd kick up a fuss and create a scene, considering her temperament and usual behavior. The old lady wondered what Tsunade did to ensure she stayed quiet throughout the ceremony. Perhaps she'd been lightly drugged. Didn't matter, as long as the two were married. The Uchiha looked fine and imposing in his midnight blue kimono and white obi. Koharu mentally chuckled. She bet that Fugaku brat would turn in his grave if he knew the last Uchiha, the one that mattered, anyway, was marrying the Kyuubi no Gaki. He'd be rolling to know that the clan was now the Uchiha Uzumaki clan, and their Uchiha fan had been defiled by the Uzumaki spiral sitting prominently in the center of the symbol. Koharu frowned. She and Homura hadn't been happy to find out that Tsunade had gone behind their backs and changed the clan name and symbol without discussing it with them. Blatant disrespect of their authority. But then again, she'd been disrespectful of them from the start. It still galled the two ancient elders that Tsunade came back because of Naruto and not because they had summoned her, that she'd lost her precious necklace to the kid, and that she'd practically promised the position of Rokudaime to her. Homura thought that the Uchiha would make a better Rokudaime, but Koharu disagreed. The boy did betray Konoha and run to Orochimaru, of all people. It showed that he was weak, too weak to fight the cursed seal. Whereas the girl had the Kyuubi under control all the while, and her thoughts had never turned to revenge against Konoha. Koharu snapped out of her thoughts, and refocused on the ceremony. The Uzumaki girl was strong. She seemed to take a lot after her father and mother, those brats. In a way, Koharu was glad that Tsunade had kept the Uzumaki name, and waited for when her father's name would be known as well. The female elder watched as the new couple drank sake from the same saucer. Sasuke watched his bride curiously under an expressionless facade. Naruto was too quiet, and seemed to be doing everything mechanically. Her eyes were clouded over, and her expression, demure to everyone else, was hollow and blank to those who knew her well. He had been rather stunned to see her in the orange kimono. She had looked like she was floating on a cloud, since the bottom of the kimono was white in color. He had felt his heart start to grow warm at the sight of Naruto so womanly. Sasuke had immediately crushed that warm feeling. But the red lipstick looked good on her. The Hokage, who was officiating their wedding, was also rather distracted, although she didn't make any mistakes. He had noticed the same distractedness and what seemed like sorrow and anxiety on Jiraiya's and Iruka's faces. He discreetly turned his focus back to Naruto. He'd been floored, even though he hadn't shown it, to find out that Naruto was a girl. A flush threatened to form as he remembered that they'd gone together to the onsen when they were genin. And they'd sometimes share the same tent or room if the mission required them to do so. He wondered if Naruto had even known she was a girl back then. Probably not, he decided. The girl couldn't act to save her life. Sasuke wondered where Naruto's thoughts were. Possibly on the beating she had gotten last night. He had watched coolly as his fiancée got abused by the group of men. He didn't particularly care about her, and kept repressing a twinge of guilt that nagged at him to stop them. He almost gave in, but she had started a genjutsu, he had seen it through his Sharingan, and had painfully dragged herself home. He had decided to follow her home. All the way home, till the time she'd collapsed into bed without cleaning herself or changing, she hadn't seemed to realize he had been following her. Why the heck was he even concerned about her well-being? Probably because she was his ticket to killing Itachi. Yeah, that was probably it. Naruto needed to be alive in order to be Itachi bait. He'd probably gotten pissed at the men because they were trying to diminish his chance at avenging his parents and clan. His eyes caught sight of the new Uchiha Uzumaki symbol on her kimono and frowned mentally. He had been furious when Kakashi had appeared in his new apartment with his new clothes, and found that they all bore the new clan symbol. Only then did he realize he half remembered that the Hokage had mentioned the new clan name. He remembered he hadn't paid attention because the Hokage had mentioned it was just after she dropped the bomb about his ex-teammates, soon-to-be wife's real gender. It's all for the sake of killing Itachi. He'd divorce the Dobi, get back the Uchiha name and symbol, and find the least irritating female in Konoha, and revive his clan after he killed Itachi. The Hokage's voice floated through his thoughts, saying something about exchanging rings and kissing the bride. He pulled himself out of his daze, and prepared to just do it mechanically for appearance's sake. Make the council relics happy, and he would have the chance to kill Itachi. The Hokage's voice also seemed to pull Naruto out of her daze, and Sasuke saw a parade of emotions cross her face for an instant before she schooled it into neutrality. But her eyes couldn't hide her real emotions. Those expressive, beautiful blue eyes that could only belong to Uzumaki Naruto were showing determination, sorrow and fear. Fear of what? And what was she sad about? Last night's incident. He wondered as he calmly lifted her lightly trembling hand and slipped the ring on, and allowed her to do the same for him. Then he brought his head nearer to her, looking her in the eye. He could see her tense and almost back away. It was not last night's incident, then. But he couldn't tell what brought about the fear and sorrow. Quickly, he tilted his head slightly and chastely brushed his lips against hers. It was the faintest of contacts, but she had tensed as if he was threatening to decapitate her. That annoying twinge of something rose in his heart again as his head went back to its original position. Tsunade said a few words more, then people were clapping hands, and the younger Konoha ninja were whistling and catcalling. The Hokage's aide brought them the marriage certificate, and they both signed it silently, not looking at each other. So this is what you meant by saving a friend. Kakashi's amused voice came from behind her, and she turned around to look at her former sensei. The ceremony was over. Her husband was talking, or rather, being talked to, by a few clan heads and the council. Naruto had been surprised to find the clan heads there for the ceremony, but then she realized that something this important, namely, it involved the last Uchiha, and the merging of that clan and a relatively obscure family to form a new clan name, so the heads should have been present. Well, yeah, Naruto replied shortly. She missed the anxiety that crossed the silver-haired man's face. He gripped her shoulder. All the best, Naruto, he said quietly. Kakashi gave her shoulder a squeeze and disappeared. Naruto absently looked at where Kakashi had been standing as she played with her new wedding ring. A hand descended on her shoulder, and she turned around. Feeling better, Naruto? Iruka asked kindly. The blonde girl just nodded quietly. Iruka gave her a small smile. That's good. He paused for a while, smiling at her fondly. You know, it feels like I've just given my daughter in marriage. Naruto stared at him with tinges of hope in her eyes. Daughter. Yeah, I feel like a father who has just handed his daughter to her husband. Feels like I've given away part of the family or something. You, me, daughter, father. Naruto blurted incoherently. Iruka nodded, his eyes a little teary. Naruto wrapped him in a bone-crushing hug, feeling her own eyes start to tear and a warm feeling settle into her formerly empty heart. Iruka, Tsusen? She asked tentatively. The man started in surprise, and Naruto almost backed off before he smoothed back her hair and chuckled warmly. Tsusen? Huh, I'll have to get used to that. But it'll be my pleasure to have you call me Tsusen, Naruto. The blonde girl released her newly acknowledged foster father, and grinned happily at him. Iruka was glad to see most traces of her earlier somber mood vanish from her face, to be replaced by her usual cheerfulness. He lifted his hand and carefully wiped away a tear from her eye. Naruto frowned a little and looked sheepish. Sorry, Iruka-Tusen, I seem to get all teary and stuff nowadays. Iruka gave her a half smile and opened his mouth to say something, but was cut off with a strangled cry of, "Leader." Both the shinobi turned to the source of the sound to find Konohamaru staring and pointing dramatically at Naruto. Naruto's sheepish look returned and Iruka chuckled as Konohamaru rushed to them. I'll see you later, Naruto. Take care. Iruka gave her a pat on the head and left to find his wife. Leader, Konohamaru said again in a pitiful tone, staring with a tragic expression on his face. You're a girl. Naruto shot him an amused look tinged with irritation, though she was inwardly worried that he might be angry with her for keeping it a secret from him. And, a girl. You're a girl. Believe me, it's not by my choice, Naruto said dryly, looking at the shocked teen. Konohamaru was also dressed in a kimono with the Sarutobi family symbol on his sleeves. He had been the eldest of the Sarutobi since Asuma died, and thus was the head of the family comprised only of himself and a young nephew, Asuma's and Kurenai's child. A girl. Naruto narrowed an eye at him. Is there anything wrong with being a girl? I hope you're not trying to say that girls are weaker. Poor Konohamaru couldn't get over his shock at seeing his beloved leader was really a girl. Leader's a girl. And looking exceptionally girly too. Rang out Kiba's voice. The grinning young man rested an arm over Konohamaru's shoulder. Shut up, Kiba, Naruto said, fidgeting uncomfortably. They forced me to wear this, okay. Not something I'd do of my own choice. T-shirts and pants for me anytime. Ignoring Konohamaru's, a girl, Kiba winked at Naruto. Hey, you look fine as a girl. Looking good without the chest bindings. Naruto blushed fiercely. Kiba, she shouted, swinging a fist to his face, which he dodged easily. Kiba-kun, admonished Hinata, who had arrived to stand beside the Inuzuka. The man just laughed uproariously, disregarding the fist waved in his face. I can still kick your even when I'm in a skirt, dog breath. Yeah, sure, Kiba drawled, grinning at his friend. Naruto grinned back. Glad to know you agree, she said mischievously, enjoying the way Kiba spluttered and Hinata tittered. Naruto. Congratulations. Shino materialized beside the still staring Konohamaru. Naruto smiled at the man in shades. Thanks, she said. I think. Shino nodded and walked off to the refreshment table. Naruto looked around to see that most of the guests were clustered around the table, and Sasuke was still getting talked to by some clan head geezers. Yeah, I'd been meaning to ask you, started Kiba, his face showing curiosity. Why'd you marry the Uchiha, anyway? He suddenly appears in the village, and next thing we know you're engaged to him. Naruto put on an embarrassed, shy look. Haha, well, I always had feelings for him, and it turned out he had feelings for me, and so, this happened, she choked out, mentally shuddering at the words. Feelings for him, he having feelings for her. Another shudder. Kiba shot her a look that told her he didn't believe her story one bit, but instead said, be sure to start on making little Narutos and Sasukes soon. With a leer, and escaped to the refreshment table, laughing his head off as Hinata tried valiantly to hold back the furious and blushing blonde. I'm gonna slice his, Rasengan up his, tie him butt to the Sandame's face, Naruto muttered, her expression a mix of embarrassment and rage. Troublesome, drawled Shikamaru. Tamari smacked his head. Hey, girl, never thought you'd be the first girl to go, hey. She smirked. Naruto tore herself from her plans to give Kiba a good senengarashi and looked up at the Sunakunoichi. Hey Tamari. Yeah, she said uncertainly. Both Shikamaru and Tamari narrowed their eyes at her, and she gave a short laugh. Man, you both have identical expressions. Been hanging around each other too much, she grinned. Both Shikamaru and Tamari snorted, then realizing they had done the same thing, looked at each other, turned away and snorted again in unison. Naruto laughed at them, and Tamari reached over and smacked her on the back of her head. Gaki. That's what happens when you get married. She smirked. I'll give you 2 months before you start acting like your husband. Naruto spluttered. Shikamaru sighed and put an arm around his wife. As long as your husband doesn't start acting like you, he mumbled. The three of them gave this a second of thought before they all shuddered. Naruto made a disgusted face as a mental image of an uproariously laughing and bouncing Sasuke entered her mind. Not happening. You look more than usual, came Sai's voice from behind her. Naruto rolled her eyes and turned around, peeling back her sleeve and flinging her fist into the black-haired man's face. It dissolved into ink, and the rest of his body turned into a splat on the floor as well. Naruto shrieked and quickly lifted the skirts of her kimono and backed away. Sai, baka, you'll ruin my kimono, you sound like hag. Sai's voice was amused, and he had a smile on his face. Knowing him well, Naruto could tell the smile was rather fake. Lame, Sai, Naruto growled at him, carefully checking the floor for ink before releasing her kimono. Then she realized something. Where are Sakura and Ino, anyway? Mission in Kiri, answered Choji, his mouth full of food. He swallowed and continued, Tsunade-sama sent them 2 days ago, together with Lee and Tenten. Naruto mentally breathed a sigh of relief at not having to meet Sakura yet and smiled at Choji looking blissful with a full plate in his left hand and a pair of chopsticks in his right. Leader's a girl, came Konohamaru's anguished voice. Naruto turned in surprise. She'd forgotten about him, he was still standing there with a bewildered expression on his face. Sighing, Naruto shook his shoulders in an attempt to snap him out of his daze, then slung an arm around his shoulder and half-led half-dragged him towards the refreshments. Temari, Shikamaru, Sai and Choji all followed the blonde with their eyes. They had not missed the fact that the bride didn't seem particularly excited, or happy even, about her out-of-the-blue wedding. They hadn't even known the Uchiha had been back till they bumped into him in the village streets on different occasions a few days ago. While most of the shinobi and all of the village welcomed the Uchiha back because they weren't informed of his defection 6 years ago, the Konoha 11, especially those involved in the failed retrieval attempt all those years ago, weren't as forgiving as Naruto seemed to be. Troublesome, muttered Shikamaru. Choji shrugged. Sasuke seemed to listen neutrally as the male elder droned on and on about something, but inwardly he was itching to just turn on his heel and walk away. Out of the corner of his eye, he observed the guests, other than the clan heads, the Hokage, the white-haired Sannin, the Hokage's aide, Kakashi-sensei, Iruka-sensei, the ramen lady and another lady that looked like an Inuzuka. The guests were his former genin peers and 2 more men he recognized from the time they came to get him in Kusa no Kuni. Naruto appeared at the very edge of his vision, and various people came up to talk to her, sometimes blocking her from his sight. Not that he cared. He didn't want to be back in Konoha in the first place, but since he was here, and the council had presented him a good opportunity to kill Itachi, he'd do anything as long as his revenge was complete. His focus turned back to the elder, who was rounding up his speech. Sasuke gave the man a curt nod, and stalked off to stand on his own at one side of the circular rooftop. He crossed his arms as he looked up at the Hokage monument, but his thoughts were on who to choose as his sensei. Sasuke. Sasuke turned his head slightly to see his old academy sensei standing next to him, arms crossed over his chest and staring at the monument. Sasuke ignored the man and turned back to face the monument. The features of the stone faces couldn't really be observed in the darkness of the night that had fallen. I know why you consented to marrying Naruto, Iruka said softly, but his tone was hard. Since Naruto herself agreed to this, there's nothing much I can say. But don't hurt her. She's been through enough in life, and she doesn't need her best friend to break her heart again. Sasuke didn't reply. He didn't really care about the Dobi. As long as she was in a good enough condition as Itachi bait, he was satisfied. Iruka's voice softened. I don't know what you expect from this marriage, Sasuke. But Naruto doesn't know what family life is like. She wouldn't know how to act like a wife, or how to live with another person, either. Go easy on her. The man shifted on his feet, still looking out over the monument. Hatred and revenge aren't everything. Naruto could teach you that, if only you'd want to learn. Sasuke didn't turn his head as Iruka left him and went back into the light provided by cheerful lanterns strung up around the rooftop. The place where he was standing was shadowy, that's why he chose the spot. After a while, he got steadily more and more irritated as more and more people came up to him to warn him against upsetting Naruto. How on earth did the Dobi manage to get herself so many annoying guard dogs? First the Hokage and the white-haired Sannin, then Iruka, and now Kiba, Neji, a blonde kunoichi with a Suna Hitai, a brown-haired brat Sasuke recognized as the little brat who used to follow Naruto around, a black-haired man around their age who had a fake smile on the whole time, and another black-haired man around Kakashi's age. Sasuke recognized the last two from Kusa no Kuni. It really annoyed him, but he wouldn't admit that it was because Naruto had so many people that cared for her. He wasn't jealous. He didn't need those pathetic bonds, which was why he'd severed them in the first place. Naruto noticed Sasuke's dark form in the shadows that couldn't be reached by the light of the lanterns, but didn't go near him. Instead, she chatted and laughed with her friends, and watched in amusement as Tsunade Obachan and Shizune Nichan argued about sake. Shizune Nichan kept snatching sake out of the annoyed and slightly tipsy Hokage's hands, protesting that she still had work waiting at her office. It had gotten late, and most people were starting to leave. The clan heads had all wished her congratulations, and she had pasted on a polite smile and endured it all. She was glad it was almost over. Uchiha Uzumaki-san, croaked an old lady's voice beside her, and Naruto turned to the voice. Frowning mentally as she saw the female elder standing there with a smug look, she schooled her features into a neutral expression. Obasan, she greeted, knowing that it wasn't polite of her to do so. Not that she cared. The old lady's smug look deteriorated into faint annoyance. Naruto smirked inwardly. Congratulations on your marriage, Kaime, the old lady said. Save your felicitations for those who want them, Baba, Naruto said in a neutral voice to match her neutral face. You know very well why I'm doing this. All in the interests of the village, Kaime, the elder rejoined. I would just like to remind you that even though you think of this as a mission, it is a real, legal marriage, and as a wife you have duties to your husband. I know the conditions of the deal, Baba, Naruto cut in, her eyes hard. She was already scheming of how to get rid of the two ancient elders when she became Hokage. The elder gave her a smug look. Excellent. I was merely offering you advice on the responsibilities of a wife, as I know you have not had an example, a mother, to guide you about these things. The old lady noticed Naruto's narrowed eyes, trembling, fisted hands and dark look. She pursed her lips. Very well, then. As a loyal shinobi of Konoha I'm sure I can expect you to carry out your duty flawlessly. Oyasumi, Uchiha Uzumaki. Naruto gritted her teeth as the elder swept away from her and left the rooftop. An arm descended around her shoulders. Kon hick grats. Naruto. Hick. Be a good hick little wife. Hick. Kiba said, grinning drunkenly at her. Naruto fought the urge to plant her fist in his face, and chose instead to wave away the fumes of his breath from her face. You're drunk, dog breath, she muttered as Hana Nichan gave Naruto a smile and an Oyasumi, see you around, and dragged her younger brother home. Kiba was the last to leave. The others had left while she had been talking to the relic. Jiraiya clapped her on her shoulder, and left after giving her an unreadable look. Tsunade walked a little unsteadily to Naruto, with an annoyed Shizune at her side. Uchiha Uzumaki Kaime Naruto, she said, her cheeks pink due to the sake. What a mouthful. She straightened herself, and swayed a little, then bellowed, Uchiha Uzumaki Sasuke. Naruto watched the figure in the darkness tense and turn their way. She could tell that Sasuke was annoyed at being yelled at. Tsunade stared at him for a while, then, as he just stared back, she impatiently beckoned him over. He reluctantly complied, and walked towards them to stand almost an arm's length away from Naruto. The blonde's dull ache in her heart returned, but she tried to ignore it. It's a mission. The Uchiha Uzumaki couple, Tsunade said, and blinked at them. A pause, then Shizune cleared her throat. Tsunade nodded to herself. Right. You have tomorrow off, then report to me in my office for further instructions. Okay, you can both go to your new home now, and I'll see you in the day after tomorrow. Naruto blinked, head tilted to the side. New home? What new home? She asked suspiciously, dread starting to curl in her stomach. Tsunade blinked at her. Your new home, she said slowly, as if talking to a small child. You and Sasuke are married, so you'll be staying together. Your belongings have been moved already. Nani? Stupid Obachan. Crazy idea, staying in the same house, touching my things without permission, Naruto muttered darkly as she trudged behind Sasuke to their new apartment. How could Tsunade not have informed her of this earlier? She hadn't even thought about the possibility of having to stay with Sasuke. How was she supposed to know that they had to stay together? Erg, she continued muttering as she looked up to see Sasuke walk calmly up the stairs of their new apartment building, fish out some keys from somewhere, unlock, and open the door to their apartment. From the moment she stepped in, Naruto could tell that this apartment was much better than her previous one. For starters, it was much bigger. Her old apartment could practically fit in the living room of this apartment. The apartment was dark. Naruto closed the door behind her and locked it. Then, using her heightened sense of sight, she carefully made her way to the windows and opened the curtains a little. Moonlight streamed in, and she could see the layout of the room better. There was a comfortable-looking sofa set in the middle of the room, 2 shelves by the wall, and a few decorations on the shelves and on the wall. The place, all in all, was a pleasant fusion of modern and traditional. The doors to the kitchen and corridor that she presumed led to the bedrooms, she fervently hoped it was plural, were shoji doors. Sasuke didn't bother to turn on the lights as he silently opened the shoji door to corridor and disappeared into it. A little ticked off at his silence, Naruto followed him in time to see him vanish into a door at the end of the corridor. Squinting a little, she noticed 2 doors parallel to the corridor, one on each side. She opened the door on her left first, and it turned out to be the bathroom cum toilet. She closed the bathroom door and opened the remaining one. It was a bedroom, and she could tell it was hers. Feeling much relieved that they didn't have to share a room, she bounced into her room and looked around. Her few posters that had hung near her bed in her old apartment now decorated the wall of her new room. Even her Kakashi doll hung beside her bed. It was quite dark in the room, so she stepped towards the least dark area and reached out to feel some curtains. Grasping the cloth, she pulled the curtains apart to let the moonlight flood her room. The window was full length, and opened out onto a balcony. Grinning happily, she opened the window and stretched outside to take a breath of fresh air, then stepped back into the room and closed the window. Turning around, she noted that the bed was to the left of the door, and opposite the bed were a cupboard and a shelf. At the foot of the bed were a desk and chair, and in the middle of the room was a nice, plush rug. She opened the cupboard to find that her clothes had been carefully hung. The drawers of the cupboard contained carefully folded clothes. She laughed in her head, the cupboard wouldn't stay so neat for long. She closed the cupboard and went to stand on the rug, letting her toes sink into the plush material since she had left her shoes at the Genkan. She smiled a little. Maybe living in this apartment wasn't too bad. A large yawn erupted from her, and as she stretched her arms upward she realized that she was quite tired. Yawning again, she picked at the knot of her obi to start taking off her kimono. Seconds passed, and she couldn't undo her obi. She frowned, and her fingers picked irritably at the knot for a few minutes, but to no avail. Giving up on the irritating thing, she growled and threw herself onto the bed. The bed was a little bigger than her bed at home, and the futon was firmer. She knew that sleeping on firmer futons was better for her back. Tsunade had been trying to get her to change her old, lumpy mattress at her old apartment for quite a while. She snuggled into the comfortable, firm new pillows and drew the blanket over her body, and closed her eyes. Only to open them again. It was uncomfortable sleeping in the formal kimono, and she made a silent noise of frustration as she sat up. Annoyed, she pushed back her sleeves and tried to work on the knot again, but she still got nowhere. An idea popped into her head. Perhaps Sasuke could help. Tiredness forced her to get up and pad to the door Sasuke had disappeared behind. She knocked gently on the door, and a few long seconds passed before she heard an indistinct noise inside. Taking it as permission to enter, she tried the knob to find it was unlocked, and quietly opened the door. Sasuke's room, she noted, was pretty much like hers. It had the same furniture, although the decorations were fewer. Sasuke himself was sitting on the bed, looking expectantly at her. Suddenly feeling embarrassed, she blushed and her fingers picked at the blasted knot again. It was a good thing Sasuke's curtain was only opened a crack, so he couldn't see the redness of her cheeks. Anyo. Hey. I kinda need your help, she stammered, feeling ashamed at having to ask for help in such a simple thing. It had occurred to her to simply cut the obi with a kunai, but the kimono was kinda expensive, and she wanted to keep it carefully and intact. Sasuke frowned faintly. She could just make out the slight furrowing of his brows in the weak moonlight. Better get this over with, she thought, and said aloud, I was wondering, could you help me untie my obi? I can't seem to do it. She reddened again with shame at having to ask for help from Sasuke, of all people, with what was definitely a simple task to most people. But then, she wasn't most people, and this was one of the very few times, only the second time, actually, that she was wearing a formal kimono. The first had been during Iruka Tusen and Ayame Nichan's wedding. Hinata-chan had helped her into and out of the kimono that time. Her former teammate didn't acknowledge that he'd heard her, and, embarrassed and a little angry, she turned to go, but then he raised his right hand in what seemed like a beckoning gesture. Naruto hesitated for a moment, then stepped in front of him. Wordlessly, he started untying the knot. A thought sprang up in Naruto's mind, and she flushed darkly. It was like what she'd read in Ika Ika Violence once, and she'd forgotten about it because it was boring, but now it came back to her mind. She remembered reading about a newly married couple spending their first night together, and how the husband started to untie his bride's obi and let it drop to the floor, then slowly open her kimono and push it off her shoulders, and she blushed to the tips of her ears, thankful for the darkness that kept Sasuke from seeing her face. Damn that Ero Sennin, forcing her to read his perverted books. Sasuke would never think of her that way, and she would never allow someone other than a husband who actually loved her to touch her, either. The dull ache in her heart intensified, and she felt her heart grow heavy with disappointment. Sasuke had finished with the obi, and she quickly ignored the heaviness of her heart and grabbed the obi. Her kimono fell open to reveal the white under kimono. Blushing again, she quickly pulled the kimono together. Thanks, Sasuke. This is only the second time I'm wearing a formal kimono, and the last time I had Hinata-chan to help me, so I don't really know about all this kind of stuff. Tying rope knots are a piece of cake, but these knots drive me crazy, she broke off as she realized she was rambling. Stepping quickly to the door, she uttered a quiet, thanks, Sasuke. Oyasumi, and closed the door behind her. Deep onyx eyes followed her to the door, and stared at the door after she left. Naruto stirred uncomfortably. She felt like she had been sleeping with her head on small rock. Annoyed, she opened her eyes only to squeeze them shut immediately at the sunlight that streamed through the window. Erg, she groaned, and turned to face the wall, away from the sun. Groggily, she reached behind her head and patted around, only to find that she had forgotten to undo the bun her hair was in, which accounted for the rock she felt. Groaning again, she clumsily pulled at the bun until it became loose. Sighing in relief, she brought her hand down and placed it under her cheek, and went back to sleep. Rather, she tried to go back to sleep, but her internal clock always woke her up at 7 in the mornings, and it was ringing itself crazy in her head right now. Growling with frustration, she flopped onto her back and rubbed at her eyes, then forced them open, and threw back her blanket. Yawning widely, she swung her legs over the side of the bed and stretched luxuriously. Naruto stood and stretched again. One hand scratched her hair, and the other her side as she stepped to her window and looked out. She could see the Hokage monument, and the Hokage tower beneath it. She smiled sleepily, glad that she could still see the monument like she had been able to from her previous home. She realized that the apartment was on the 3rd floor, and it was higher than the 2-story houses she could see across the street from her balcony. That was a benefit, she wouldn't have to worry about anyone peeping in. The sun glinted off something on the fingers of her left hand and the wrist of her right hand. Blinking sleepily, she brought both hands to the front of her face to find the source of the reflections. On her right wrist was Gaara's bracelet, and she smiled fondly as she twisted her wrist round a little, letting the sun's rays dance off the clear glass beads and silver charms. On the 4th finger of her left hand was an unfamiliar weight. Squinting, she suddenly realized what it was, her wedding ring. Naruto brought her hand closer to her eyes and observed the rather broad and flat band made of rose gold. The sun, she realized, had been reflected by the tiny white diamonds and single ruby that were arranged in the Uchiha Uzumaki symbol in the ring. She stared at it for a while, but it was too early to start thinking. She cracked a yawn, enjoying the feel of the soft morning sun on her skin. Another yawn, and she turned around, and left her room to go to the bathroom. She found that her toothbrush and toothpaste sat together with another set of toothbrush and toothpaste in a mug above the sink. The other toothbrush, Sasuke's, obviously, was a little wet, showing that it had been used not too long ago. Naruto blinked, realizing that he was already awake. She went through her morning routine, then stepped back to her room to change out of the under kimono she had slept in, and into a pair of feminine underclothes, since she wasn't on duty, otherwise she'd bind her chest. Bras tended to chafe when she used taijutsu, and a black t-shirt with a red, puffy cloud-like design on the front and a prominent though not too large, Uchiha Uzumaki symbol on the back, must have been Ayame Nichan's doing, and a pair of baggy shorts that reached below her knees. Her usual off-duty attire. She gave her hair a bit of a brush as she looked in the mirror. Her hair was a stiff, and stuck out at funny angles. On normal days her hair was always spiky and a little shaggy, but now it was stiff, probably due to the hairspray Ayame Nichan had generously sprayed on yesterday. She pursed her lips, and decided to wash her hair later. Her jewelry, she never thought she'd see the day she actually wore jewelry. Heck, she'd never imagined herself married, mission or not, caught her eye. Shaking her head lightly, she decided to pull on her usual black fingerless gloves, and gave a self-satisfied nod when the black material covered both the bracelet and the ring. The blonde left her room and wandered down the corridor and into the living room. In the daylight, she could better observe the living room, but her stomach gave a loud growl. Deciding to obey it, she left exploring the living room for later and slid open the remaining shoji door. The kitchen was bright and cheerful. Cupboards lined the walls over the kitchen counter and sink on one side, and a refrigerator, stove, and oven lined the other. The wall opposite the door had 2 windows with short curtains. A modern-looking wooden table with 4 chairs sat in the middle of the room. There was an alcove to the right of the door, and it had a washing machine and clotheslines, as well as a shuttered window that could be opened to admit the sun. Naruto was impressed. She had never had such luxuries in her life. Sighing in contentment, she skipped over to the fridge and yanked it open, then frowned. It was almost empty, only a few tomatoes and some onigiri in a container stared back at her. Acting on a suspicion, she opened every single cupboard and drawer in the counter to find that there was nothing edible in it, only kitchen utensils, cutlery, bowls, plates, cups, mugs and glasses. She sighed, and her stomach growled. Sasuke came in, and proceeded to the fridge where he took out the container of onigiri. He sat down with his back to where she was standing near the door, and calmly ate the onigiri without acknowledging her or offering her any. Anger flared for a moment, then she decided she wasn't going to allow him to ruin her life. It was just a mission, she wouldn't allow his bastard nest to rile her up. Ohio, Sasuke, she greeted, smiling cheerfully at his back. There's practically nothing here, and I'm starving, so I'm going out to get some food, cereal, milk, maybe some rice and meat. And cup ramen. Definitely getting cup ramen. Anything you want. Sasuke ignored her, pouting, then sticking her tongue at his back, she said, fine then, Tem. See you later. Naruto grumbled to herself as she walked down the street towards the grocery store she usually shopped at. What was the Tem's problem? It wasn't like she forced him to marry her. She was doing him a favor by marrying him, so couldn't he at least be a little nicer? Bastard. She missed the 12-year-old Sasuke she knew. Not that he'd been overly nice to her, but at least she could detect the faint friendship that lined his insults and sarcasm. 18-year-old Sasuke apparently preferred to just ignore her. Grumble, 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 and she reached the front of the shop. Just as she was about to enter, a Chunin she recognized as working in the Hokage Tower greeted her, and informed her that the Hokage wished to see her right away. But it's my day off. And I'm hungry, complained Naruto, hands on her hips. The Chunin cowered, but held his ground. Tsunade-sama mentioned it was urgent, he said. Naruto crossed her hands over her chest and drew her lips into a straight line. Fine, she huffed, and Shunshin-ed to the door of the Hokage's office. Tsunade Obachan, what's so urgent? I'm hungry, shouted Naruto as she barged into the Hokage's office, and avoided the metal ruler thrown at her. She marched up to the Hokage's desk and slapped her palms down onto it, glaring at the blonde behind the desk. The older blonde looked tiredly at her. Sit down, Kaime. I hope you had a good rest, she said, and mumbled something Naruto couldn't catch. I hope you had an interesting, fun-filled night, Yaki. Came Jiraiya's voice, a positive leer in it. Naruto, who had slouched into one of the two chairs in front of the desk, snapped upright and glared at the Sannin, who had just hopped in through the window. Arrow Sennin, you perverted, lecherous old, she started angrily, but the self-proclaimed super pervert cut her off. No marks on the skin, no sign of exhaustion, he said thoughtfully as he looked over her, rubbing his chin. He then shook his head sadly. You didn't do anything last night, did you? He asked mournfully. I thought I trained you better than that. Naruto blushed brightly and jumped out of her seat to land a punch at the grinning white-haired man, but Tsunade beat her to the punch, literally. Jiraiya retired to his usual corner against the window, cradling his bump-sporting head with a hurt look on his face. Naruto dropped back into her seat and crossed her arms sulkily, and Tsunade pinched the bridge of her nose. Kaime, something occurred last night that involves you, Tsunade stated, looking serious. Naruto frowned. I figured as much, seeing as you called me here, she said with a tinge of sarcasm. Who do I have to marry this time? Or do I have to start producing Sharingan babies sometime soon? Kaime. Tsunade snapped, her eyes blazing at the young woman. Naruto looked away. Sorry, Obachan, she murmured, a little ashamed. Tsunade massaged her temples. Last night, after your wedding ceremony, Shizune hauled me in here to finish the paperwork I had left, Tsunade said as Jiraiya sniggered. Shut it, old man. The only reason I'm in this chair doing the work and not you is because you didn't have the balls to do it. The Hokage glared at her old teammate. Jiraiya glared back. Why? I didn't even know you had balls, Tsunade Haim. Anything else you hide under that full-body genjutsu? Wrong thing to say to an annoyed, sleep and sake-deprived Hokage. She glared angrily at him, marched towards him and, lifting him up by the collars so that he dangled on his toes, gave him a chakra-powered kick to his lower abdomen region even before he could start scrambling away. He flew with a painful, oof, out the window he had come in, and was soon out of sight. Next time you'll get it in the jewels, you old pervert. She shouted out the window, and men within hearing range all instinctively covered their crotches at the fury and threat in the Hokage's voice. Tsunade marched back to her chair and dropped into it, closed her eyes and breathed deeply for a half a minute. Naruto had a scared look on her face, and was eternally thankful Tsunade never did that to her when she pissed the Hokage off. Brown eyes snapped open. Now where was I? She asked Naruto irritably. Something happened last night. Squeaked Naruto. Tsunade nodded. Right. At precisely 11 p.m., a chakra spike was felt in the very center of this room, and a seal became undone in the very center of the office. It was a time limit seal, meaning that the object sealed would remain sealed for a time period designated by the sealer. Naruto nodded to show Tsunade she understood so far. She edits seals, only managing to perform the simpler ones, but she'd heard of a time limit seal before, even though she had never seen one. Tsunade paused for a moment and looked at Naruto, a guarded expression on her face. 2 private communication scrolls were revealed. Both bore the seal of Sarutobi-sensei. Naruto knew that private communication scrolls were just that, scrolls meant for personal messages, not as jutsu textbooks or official missives, they were more of letters. What really had her attention was who the seal on the scrolls belonged to. What did the Sandaime felt he needed to seal with a time limit seal, and what did it have to do with her? One was meant for the current Hokage, and so I opened it. It contained instructions about the second scroll and an explanation about the time limit seal, as well as sealed personal letters to Jiraiya and myself. The second scroll, Tsunade continued a tad more slowly, was meant for you. Naruto's face showed her surprise and curiosity. In the first scroll, Sarutobi-sensei explained that he wrote you an explanation of who your parents were, and he included pictures of them, and a personal letter they wrote to you before your birth. Naruto's mind froze. Her parents. According to his explanation, he sealed both scrolls to appear on the night of October 11th, since he knew that the Hokage would have to officiate the festival on the 10th, Tsunade said carefully, watching the frozen look on the face opposite hers. She tossed a small scroll towards Naruto, and winced as it hit her in the stomach. The younger blonde had not even tried to catch it. Whether you open it or not is up to you. What I can say is that the truth about your parents, or your father, mainly, is controversial. But I believe if you decide to read the scroll, it's about time the rest of Konoha found out who you really are as well. Tsunade observed the Junin in front of her. She had been surprised to read what Sarutobi-sensei revealed about Naruto's parents in the first scroll, but she wasn't shocked. In fact, she had formulated her own conclusion as to Naruto's father much earlier. Who wouldn't? The resemblance was so obvious. But at the same time, it came as quite a relief to find that she had been right. You're dismissed, Kaime. Don't forget, you and Sasuke are to meet me here tomorrow morning. Naruto got up in a daze, clutching the scroll tightly, and left the office after a hastily murmured, Hokage-sama. Tsunade bit her lip as she watched her adopted sister leave, hoping she would be alright. Deep down, the blonde knew Naruto would be alright. She had weathered 18 years of hate and almost 12 years of loneliness, and she had come out fine. She'd be alright. Naruto walked dazedly back to her old apartment, and was about to enter before she realized that she now lived somewhere else. Half-consciously, she shunshin-ed to the door of her new apartment, entered quietly and proceeded to her room, not realizing the gaze of the onyx eyes of her husband had followed her from the main door to the shoji door from where he sat on the couch. The blonde closed her room door and sank to the floor with her bed supporting her back. The scroll rolled out of her limp hand and stopped half a meter in front of her, and she stared at it. Did she want to open the scroll? Did she want to find out who her parents were? Especially after Tsunade Obachan mentioned that her father's identity was controversial. Did she really want to know after all this time? Were they even alive? She forgot to ask Tsunade Obachan about that detail. She stared at the scroll for a long time, forgetting about everything else, her hunger, and the other person in the apartment. She felt as if her thoughts were churning and swirling in her mind. So many questions that had plagued her for a long time would be answered if she opened the scroll. But did she really want to know? Sasuke looked up from the scroll he was reading to the shoji door leading to the bedroom corridor. It was strangely quiet, and had been that way ever since the Dobi came back from her shopping excursion, if she had even been to the shops, that was. She had looked dazed, even more dazed than during the beginning of their wedding ceremony last night, and didn't have any shopping bags in her hand, not even a cup of instant ramen. Instead, she was holding very tightly to a small scroll that looked like a personal communication scroll. She had babbled about being hungry before going out, but had gone straight into her room since morning, hadn't even come out for lunch, and it was almost sunset now. He was annoyed with himself. The silence of the apartment bugged him, even if only faintly. Why should he even bother about what the Dobi was doing in her room? He was sure she was still there. He could sense her chakra signature, and it was fluctuating, indicating something was up with her. Not that he cared, he told himself. He returned his attention to the jutsu scroll he had salvaged from the old Uchiha compound. During the few days before the wedding he, with Kakashi, had gone to the place to bring back as many scrolls as he deemed important. He had visited his old house, and forced himself not to think of the blood that splattered the halls the last time he had been in the house. He had taken a photo from an album he'd found, a photo that only had his Otusan, Okasan and himself in it. He'd cut off his right hand before he brought anything of Itachi's with him. The photo now stood on his nightstand beside his bed, but he didn't look at it too often. He had found some jutsu scrolls belonging to the Uchiha clan, and brought those back with him. He had also taken some beautiful traditional paintings and an intricately painted shoji screen that he remembered his mother loved, and installed them in the living room where he was now. It was too quiet for a place that had that blonde loudmouth in it. Sasuke blinked and realized that he hadn't moved past the same line of text for almost an hour. Irritably, he decided to get up and fix dinner for himself when his stomach grumbled. He rolled up the scroll neatly and placed it back in its place with the other scrolls in the shelves, then padded into the kitchen and pulled out the container of onigiri that remained from breakfast, sat down in the darkening kitchen and started eating quietly. It was definitely too quiet. He loved the quiet, and he hated it at the same time. Before the incident, his home had never been quiet. His mother was a constant presence, and she loved to sing while she worked around the house. Then when they all died, he had moved out of the house, too many bad memories, and stayed on his own in an apartment. It had been deathly quiet when he stayed alone. He had learned to like the solitude, but sometimes at night the silence became oppressive. Which was one reason why he sometimes looked forward to Team 7, even if he would never admit it to anyone. He especially looked forward to being in the company of the loud blonde, who was always so cheerful and loud that it made him forget the thick silence of his lonely apartment. He always felt better when they insulted each other, sparred against each other even if he ended up being annoyed by the Dobi most of the time. He knew that someone else acknowledged him for who he was, and not the poor, pitied leftover of the Uchiha massacre. When he found out he had to live with the Dobi, he again was both a little relieved and a lot annoyed. Annoyed because of the blonde's loudness and idiocy. Relieved because of the blonde's loudness, the house wouldn't be oppressively silent. The Dobi somehow always brightened up a place. He reached for another onigiri in the dark, not bothering to switch on the lights, and wondered what was going on with the Dobi. Not that he was worried about her. Just mild curiosity about what could possibly have achieved the impossible, shutting up the blonde for almost a whole day. He finished the rice ball, which had been the last of the batch, and put the container in the sink and washed his hands. He padded back into the living room and into the corridor outside his bedroom. As he was passing the Dobi's room, he heard very faint sobs that he wouldn't have heard if he wasn't a ninja. Involuntarily, he paused outside the Dobi's door, then continued coolly to his room. He didn't care about the Dobi's private life. She was Itachi bait, a mere tool to achieve his goal. He entered his room and shut the door behind him without another thought about the girl behind the other door. The last few rays of the setting sun played across the walls of her room. Naruto looked up from where she'd been staring at the scroll on the floor for hours while biting and pinching her lower lip. I want to know, she finally decided after hours of deliberating with herself. I need to know. She reached up and switched on the lamp on her nightstand, then slowly reached for the scroll. She looked at it for a moment, running a finger gently along the lines of the Sandame's seal, then, taking a deep breath, she broke the seal and opened the scroll. Uzumaki Naruto, you are reading this letter. This means that I, for some reason, probably death, am not able to explain this 18-year secret to you personally. It might come as a shock to you to know that you are in fact a girl, and you have been from the time of your birth. I, with the approval and knowledge of the Hokage's council and the council of elders, put a cage henge on you, thus turning you into a boy. This was done because I foresaw that the villagers and shinobi might not view you in the light of a hero, which I firmly believe you are. I write this letter to you to explain who your parents are. You or the new Hokage may have searched the village archives for records concerning your parents and your birth, but I am sure you have not found any. The records are concealed in a hidden compartment in the desk in the Hokage's office, the second drawer from the bottom. I am sorry to inform you that both your parents have passed away, but they were both heroes, and they had been very excited about your birth. Your mother was Uzumaki Kushina, of the former Whirlpool country, and your father was Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage. They were both without family. Their marriage was a secret one, to protect Kushina-chan against Minato's enemies, and only a few trusted friends were let in on the secret. You will have heard of stories about how the Konoha no Kiroi Senku decimated Iowa shinobi during the Great War, and I tell you it was true. Your father was one of the greatest shinobi in Konoha, a kind and fair man. Unfortunately, as happens to every shinobi worth his chakra, he made enemies easily, which was why the marriage was kept secret. Kushina-chan was also a good kunoichi. She was always smiling and chattering away, and you remind me of her when you smile, even though you look so much like your father. Kushina-chan was independent, and never did like having to be protected. Your parents loved each other very much. Kushina-chan was always smiling, as was Minato. I remember how excited Minato was when he announced to me that Kushina-chan was pregnant with you. He was even more excited when the time drew near for Kushina-chan to give birth. It always makes me smile to remember how he went around with a perpetual smile, and was always checking up on Kushina-chan till he drove her mad. Kushina-chan had been rather weak during the pregnancy, and Minato was justifiably worried. To make matters worse, the Kyuubi no Kitsune had been spotted heading toward Konoha a day before you were born, and Minato frantically searched through the Hokage's jutsu archives to find something to get rid of the Yukai. As you know, the only method that could restrain a Yukai is the Shiki Fujin and the Hake no Fuin Shiki. It broke his heart, and your mother's heart, to know that those seals were the only way to protect Konoha, but they both knew it was Minato's duty to protect Konoha. The demon could only be sealed within a newborn baby, because the chakra coils of a newborn are not yet developed, and so can accommodate the sudden influx of chakra. Minato and Kushina-chan knew this, and they were both willing to give up their child, you, to protect Konoha, because they both knew they could not ask it of any other parent. It was a difficult decision, and they cried over it, but they both stood by their duty as shinobi of Konoha. Minato knew the price of the Shiki Fujin, and he willingly paid that price because of his love for the village and his family. I tried to reason with him to allow me to perform the sealing, but he adamantly refused, citing that it was his responsibility as Hokage. It still eats at my heart to know that I appointed your father to a position that ultimately led to his death. Had I postponed his promotion by 3 years, you would have your father with you. I ask for your forgiveness in this, Kaime. Our forces managed to hold back the Yukai until you were born on October 10th. By then, the Kyuubi had already penetrated the outer wall of the village. Minato took you from Kushina-chan without time for even a goodbye, and not half an hour later, his soul had been consumed by the Shinigami and you had become the vessel of the Kyuubi. Kushina, having been weak during her pregnancy, was weakened even more by childbirth. She clung to you for a few days after Minato passed away, but we both knew she wouldn't make it. She charged me with your care, and then left us to join Minato. I then cast the cage henge on you for your safety, and announced the rule concerning you. Minato and Kushina-chan had named you Kaime, meaning dawn, because to them you were a symbol that the darkness of the shinobi war was over, and peace was dawning. Minato had wanted to name you Naruto, and only decided against it after Kushina-chan beat it out of him. I remember how he sulked for a week about it. Since the cage henge turned your outward appearance male, I decided to name you Uzumaki Naruto, and an explanation concerning the cage henge and your real name I had written in the Hokage's log, which only the Hokage after me has the authority to read. I did not, however, include the truth of your parents in the log, choosing instead to write you this letter. However, the current Hokage should be able to recognize the Namikaze name easily enough. I tried to give you as normal a childhood as possible, but unfortunately you know better than I how I have failed. The villagers would not listen to reason, no matter how I tried to explain it to them. I felt all the more justified that I had kept your parentage a secret from them, for I had feared that they would retaliate if they knew you were Minato's daughter. Furthermore, times were tense then, since the elemental nations were still recovering from the war. Iwa would have hunted you down had they known that Minato had a daughter. Your status as Jinchuriki would make you all the more valuable. However, I could not deny you your family name, as I remember telling you, Uzumaki is your real name. While Kushina-chan was a popular person because of her personality, her name was not as well known as that of Minato's, which was why I chose to give you your mother's clan name instead of your father's. I ask your forgiveness, Kaime, for I have failed you in many ways. Had I been more proactive during your younger years, perhaps you wouldn't have grown up so lonely. As part of my apology, I seal here in this scroll photographs of your parents, and 2 jutsu scrolls of your father's techniques, the Rasengan and the Hiraishin no Jutsu. I am afraid the details on the Hiraishin no Jutsu will seem incomplete, and in fact they are. Also, your father only completed the first phase of the Rasengan. He had planned to try to fuse his elemental affinity with it, but had not the opportunity to complete it. Hiraishin no Jutsu is complete, but as he never shared the full secret behind the jutsu to anyone other than Kushina-chan, I can only write down what I myself have figured out. Minato never had the time to detail his jutsu on paper. I know you are strong and brave, Kaime. I have observed you throughout the years, and I am proud that you harbor no desire for revenge, only love for Konoha. It would make any parent proud to see how you stand up in the face of your adversities, and, knowing Minato and Kushina-chan as I do, I am sure they are proud of you. Know that I am, too. You have great potential that is all your own, and not that of the Yukai within you. You will grow strong, and I know you will surpass all previous Hokage. Do us proud, Namikaze Kaime, alias Uzumaki Naruto. Sarutobi. Sandaime Hokage. Tears had started to fall down her scarred cheeks when she came to the paragraph about her parents. It was a huge shock. The Yondaime Hokage was her father. He had always been her hero, and now to find out he was her father. She kept blinking back tears and choking back sobs as she read the rest of the letter slowly, until the end. After the letter, a seal was drawn into the scroll. She recognized it to be a simple summoning seal, the kind shinobi used to seal equipment into scrolls to carry around with them, like Tenten did with her weapons. She bit her thumb and smeared the bit of blood on the seal, then quickly made the appropriate hand seals and whispered, Kai. A soft puff of smoke, and 2 scrolls and 3 photographs appeared. With a trembling hand, she ignored the scrolls, which were probably the jutsu scrolls, and picked up the 3 photographs. She wiped her tears with her other hand and brought the photographs into the small circle of light in the now dark room. Her heart was beating wildly. Finally, after so many years, she would be able to see the faces of her parents. The first photograph was that of the Yondaime Hokage. She could recognize the face on the mountain in the face of the man smiling at her in the photograph. The face on the mountain did little justice to her father, she decided. It depicted him as a solemn, fierce-looking man, but in the photograph, he was smiling such a sweet smile that you would never believe he could look so fierce, although you could tell at once that he was a serious man. Naruto's heart clenched painfully, wishing with all her heart that she could see that wonderful smile in person, and that that smile was directed at her. She realized that she resembled her father very closely. Her features, though more feminine, were similar to his. Her hair color was the same, and she had never seen anyone else with hair as vividly blonde as hers, till now. Even the way his eyes squinted shut was similar to the way she squinted her eyes shut when she smiled her big smiles. She knew it from a picture of herself Sakura-chan had taken once. A little reluctantly, she laid aside her father's photograph and picked up the next one. This one was a photograph of a woman with sweet features and wavy, shoulder-length fiery red hair. Her mother, she realized. The woman was beautiful and radiated strength, even from a photograph. You could tell she wasn't one to be taken lightly. Naruto's lips curled up a faint smile when she saw her own shit-eating grin reflected on her mother's face. Perhaps she inherited that habit from her mother. She traced the outlines of her mother's face tenderly, then laid the photograph aside, and picked up the third one. It showed both her parents together, and her mother was very pregnant. Her father had his arm around her mother possessively, and the other hand on the bulge of her abdomen. Her mother was smiling at him. Naruto realized she had her father's eyes, although her eyes were large like her mother's. Tears started to stream down her face again, and her heart ached with a loneliness that she had never felt before. Was it possible to miss people you've never met? Because that was how she was feeling. She never gave much thought to her parentage before this, but now it seemed 18 years of loneliness surged and flooded her, and she cried sobs that seemed to wrench themselves from her heart silently for hours. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. Where's Kaime? She's supposed to be here as well. Kaime. Sasuke wondered for a second before realizing that it was Naruto's name. The house had been as quiet when he woke up this morning and when he had left, and he had sensed the Dobi's chakra signature in the apartment the whole time, but didn't care to knock on her door. After his morning routine and breakfast, during which the Dobi still hadn't appeared, he had made his way to the Hokage Tower alone, if you ignored his Anbu escorts, that was. She was still in her room when I left, he answered monotonously. Tsunade frowned. You could have woken her up, she said, obviously displeased. She's a shinobi, she should be able to keep appointments on her own, Sasuke said, his tone frosty. Tsunade's frown deepened. You live in the same house, the least you could do is knock on her door to wake her up. You're married to her now, the least you can do is start treating her like a friend, she said, and muttered, not that you deserve a friend like her. I hope she didn't take the news too hard, have to send someone to check on her later. The Hokage massaged her temples with one hand as she rifled for a piece of paper on her desk with the other. Sasuke had heard her even though she had been talking softly to herself, and again wondered what it was that could keep the Dobi quiet for a whole day. Have you chosen a sensei, Sasuke? The Hokage looked up at him. I have, he answered. A vein throbbed on her temple, but she asked in an even voice, and your choice of sensei is? Kakashi, he said. Tsunade nodded. I thought so. He is the obvious choice since he has the Sharingan and has had Anbu training. She stood up and walked to the window, opened it and stuck her head out. Come in, Kakashi. The silver-haired Junin hopped in after the Hokage. Sasuke, he greeted with a wave of two fingers as he put away a blue book. Sasuke just regarded him with his expressionless face. Tsunade dropped back into her chair. As expected, Sasuke has chosen you as his sensei, Kakashi. As such, you'll be off regular Junin duty until Sasuke is deemed ready to fight at Itachi's level, until Itachi is dead, or until I say so. You know what to do, Kakashi. The training schedule is up to you, but I want weekly reports. She narrowed her eyes at the Junin. And I want them on time. Or no more Ika Ika. Kakashi looked hurt. Ah, Tsunade-sama, you don't have to threaten my precious Ika Ika. Tsunade leaned back and crossed her arms. She gave him an exasperated look. You're like a small child, Kakashi. Now get going. Hi, Tsunade-sama, he said with a happy eye crescent, bowed, and walked out the door with Sasuke following. Kakashi leaned against the middle log as memories washed over him. They were in Team 7's favorite training area, where he had given them their first bell test. He shoved his hands in his pockets and looked skyward. What level do you place yourself at, Sasuke? He asked his former turned current student. Junin, was the answer. Without warning, Kakashi attacked him, and they engaged in a furious taijutsu battle mixed with kenjutsu and ninjutsu. Kakashi didn't have his old Anbu katana with him, so he had to block Sasuke's kusanagi with a kunai. They blew flames at each other, set water dragons on each other, and flew at each other with high speed. Kakashi had the upper hand because of experience, but he could see that Sasuke wasn't attacking blindly. He analyzed Kakashi's moves and formed plans, and was flexible enough to change his plan when Kakashi figured out what he was doing. The Junin had to uncover his Sharingan just seconds into the battle, and could tell easily that one Sharingan was barely a match against two fully formed ones. The training area resounded with metallic clangs and sounds of jutsu against jutsu. After a while, they left off the ninjutsu and concentrated more on taijutsu. Sasuke leapt into the air as Kakashi lunged at him a kunai. Automatically, he transformed into his level 2 curse seal form, and flapped his wing-like appendages. Kakashi regarded him warily, then disappeared as Sasuke dove at him at high speed. No using the curse seal, Kakashi said in his lazy tone from behind Sasuke as he pressed the tip of his kunai against Sasuke's chest where his heart was. I want to judge how far you've come on your own. The curse seal can come later, after I talk to you about it. Sasuke frowned, angry at being caught so easily. The Junin flipped his kunai away and into his kunai pouch. You are definitely at Junin level, and you'd pass easily if you were to take the selection exam. He slouched, and the blue book appeared in his hands. Your taijutsu is alright, but we still need to work on it. Kenjutsu needs a bit of work as well. Ninjutsu isn't a problem. Your strategies have improved, though you won't be catching up with Shikamaru just yet. Sasuke had released the curse seal while Kakashi had been drawing out his analysis. He shrugged on his white kimono-like top with the new Uchiha Uzumaki symbol on its back, larger than the Uchiha symbol he used to have when in Oto. That's all for today, Kakashi said rather absent-mindedly as he started to walk away with his nose buried in the book. Sasuke narrowed his eyes at the man's back and started walking in the same direction. He was annoyed at his laid-back attitude, although he knew Kakashi was far from incompetent. A pigeon circled above Kakashi's head, and he held out a hand for the bird to land on without taking his eyes off what he was reading. Sighing, he slipped the book into his rear pouch and removed the slip of paper in the holder on the bird's leg. After reading it and shooing the pigeon away, he turned to Sasuke, who was a few feet behind him. How's Naruto doing? He questioned. Sasuke just gave him a look that said, I couldn't care less. Kakashi frowned at him, and opened his mouth to reprimand the younger man, but decided against it, and gave him a happy eye crescent instead. Ma, I guess the least I can do is visit my beloved students in their new home, nay. Sasuke entered the apartment with Kakashi behind him. He closed and locked the door behind the self-invited guest, then silently led Kakashi towards Naruto's room. Kakashi knocked on the door. Yo Naruto, how was the wedding night? He asked cheerfully. There was no reply. Sasuke stood behind him with one hand resting on his kusanagi. You alright in there? You missed your appointment with the Hokage this morning, and she sent me to check on you, Kakashi continued. Naruto? He asked, knocking again. There was a faint stirring sound. I'm coming in, okay. The silver-haired man tested the doorknob, and finding it unlocked, opened the door and peered inside. Sasuke couldn't see anything because Kakashi's body was blocking the doorway, but he noticed Kakashi tensing. "Why didn't you tell me?" he heard Naruto say in a raspy voice. Kakashi eased into the room, and from behind him Sasuke saw Naruto sitting in a heap on the floor by her bed, 3 scrolls and 3 photographs in front of her. He noted her disheveled hair and tear-stained face, and the fact that she was still dressed in yesterday's clothes. "Why didn't you tell me?" Naruto asked again, piteously. Kakashi frowned thoughtfully at her, though it was hidden under his mask. He crouched down in front of the distraught girl. "What did I not tell you?" Her eyes were tired, and held some emotion Sasuke thought he recognized as sorrow. She picked up one of the photographs and weakly held it up to Kakashi, who immediately stiffened. Sasuke could barely make out the picture of a blonde wearing a white cloak from where he was standing. "What about him?" Kakashi asked warily. Naruto drew her knees up and circled her arms around them, and whispered tiredly, "Why didn't you tell me he was my father?" "Father?" wondered Sasuke. In the room, Kakashi tensed even more, and was silent for a few moments before he finally said, "I had my suspicions, but never the confirmation. And it wasn't my place to tell you." Naruto didn't reply, and instead lowered her head so that her face was buried in her knees. Kakashi stared at the photograph by Naruto's feet for a long while. Just as Sasuke was about to leave for his room, Kakashi sighed. "Come on, Naruto. I've a feeling you've been moping here for too long." He stood up and held out his hand, but Naruto didn't respond. The man sighed again and grabbed Naruto's arm and pulled her up onto her feet. Naruto wobbled, and Kakashi quickly pulled her arm around his shoulder. How long have you been in here?" he asked as he walked out of the room and towards the kitchen while supporting the blonde. "Since yesterday morning, I think," was the weak reply. "And I bet you haven't eaten anything, either. Right?" He lowered her into one of the chairs at the dining table. She slumped forward and rested her head face down in her arms on the table. Kakashi opened the fridge and tutted at the lack of food. He closed the fridge and opened a cupboard to the left of his head, and took out a bag of tea, a teapot, 2 teacups and a kettle. He filled the kettle with water and set it to boil on the stove, then slowly took a seat directly in front of Naruto. "When did you find out?" he asked, slouching back in his seat and crossing his arms. Naruto wearily shifted her head so that she could look at her former sensei with one eye. "Yesterday morning. Tsunade Obachan gave me the scroll saying it had been under a time limit seal. The scroll was from Sandame Ogg. Suka." Kakashi trailed off thoughtfully. Sasuke leaned against the wall in the corridor that led towards his room. The shoji door was partly open, and he could hear the conversation in the kitchen easily. He didn't care about Naruto, but he had to admit he was rather curious who her father was, and what was the big deal about the man's identity. "How do you feel about it?" Kakashi asked carefully, just before the kettle started singing. The legs of his chair scraped noisily against the wooden floor as he went to make the tea. Pouring 2 cups, he set one in front of Naruto and put the other cup and the teapot on the table before reseating himself. "Drink the tea. You need something, after all that emotional exhaustion and fasting." Sasuke waited for a while longer, but all he could hear was the quiet slurps of the 2 shinobi drinking their tea. He decided to take a bath instead, since he was rather grimy and sweaty from the morning's spar. "I don't know what to think, Kaka-sensei," Naruto said, setting down her teacup. She raised her head and supported it with her palms, elbows being on the table. Kakashi waited quietly for her to continue, half wishing Tsunade-sama had chosen someone else to check on the blonde. He wasn't comfortable with this emotional stuff, and he himself didn't really know what to think now that Naruto was proven to be Sensei's daughter. "I mean, when I was really small I'd wonder and pretend that the Yondaime was my father, then after that I started to forget about that fantasy, 'cause no matter how hard I tried to pretend, it would never come true. I used to imagine how people would suddenly start being nice to me and begging for my forgiveness once Sandaime Ogg declared that I was the Yondaime's son. Naruto chuckled humorlessly, and Kakashi's heart clenched a little. So after a while I grew resigned to the fact that I would never have parents, or know who they were. It wasn't any easier seeing other children with their parents, but at least I stopped hoping cause it started to hurt. I was okay for a while, then came the Genin exams and Mizuki-sensei who told me about the Kyuubi. It was shocking, to say the least. All this time I wondered why people looked at me like I was a monster, why I got beaten up on my birthdays, and then being told that my hero sealed the Yukai in me. Naruto trailed off and wiped the small tears that had formed at the corner of her eyes. Kakashi observed her quietly. He was always my hero, and will always be, and I'm gonna surpass him when I'm Hokage, she went on, her voice a little stronger. But, knowing after all this time that he's really my Otusan, I understand why he did what he did. Sandaime Ogg said there wasn't any other way to defeat the Kyuubi, and he said they cried about it, but it's still kinda difficult, you know. Naruto rubbed her eyes roughly, then smiled at Kakashi, who was relieved to see Naruto was becoming herself again. I'll be fine, Kaka-sensei. Kakashi regarded her for a moment, then gave her a happy eye crescent. I know you'll be, he said sincerely. Naruto beamed at him. What was he like? He was your sensei, wasn't he? She asked as she sipped her tea. The drink was doing her good. She wasn't feeling as jelly-like and shaky as she was a few minutes ago, though she was still feeling very tired. Kakashi stilled, and his voice caught in his throat. He had never spoken to anyone about Sensei after his death. It was too difficult. Sensei died, then shortly after he saw Sensei's body he found out Rin died during the Kyuubi's attack as well. Losing every member of his team was the extremely difficult, second only to coming home after the Genin exam to find his Chi-Chi-Yui's innards splattered on the floor. It was a very close second, though. More of a tie, actually. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Naruto looked at him pleadingly. Please, sensei. He's still kinda unreal to me. Him and Okasan. I don't know anything about them, and all I have are their pictures. Naruto watched Kakashi's eyes glaze over as he seemed to be lost in his memories. Feeling guilty for forcing the man to relive what were obviously unpleasant memories, she sighed. I'm sorry, that was insensitive of me, Kaka-sensei. I understand if it's difficult for you. You don't have to, she said in a small voice, unable to keep a hint of disappointment from her tone. She sipped her tea, then poured herself another cup and closed her eyes. Your mother was always smiling and cheerful, came Kakashi's voice. Naruto opened her eyes in surprise. She hadn't expected Kakashi to answer her, knowing that he wasn't the type to talk about his past. She looked at him, asking with her eyes if he really wanted to continue, but he was looking distractedly at the teacup he was holding. You reminded me of her the first time I saw you. I didn't know her too well, but I heard that she was brave and determined and independent and friendly and noisy, he went on with a smile. Your father was wise, courageous and strong. You remind me of him too. He was a great Hokage and a great sensei. He had to be, since he had to deal with Obito and me. Kakashi chuckled at some private joke. He was quite serious, but he knew how to smile and joke once in a while. His cooking ed, though. Naruto laughed softly, and Kakashi looked up at her briefly before turning his gaze back to the teacup. Sensei never told me his wife was pregnant. But then again, I wasn't easily available at that time. Kakashi gave a mirthless chuckle. My teammate Uchiha Obito died in the Great War, and gave me this Sharingan eye. Naruto recognized the self-blame in Kakashi's voice. It wasn't your fault, sensei. Kakashi laughed self-deprecatingly. Actually, it was. I had just made Junin, and was supposed to lead my team in a mission, and because of my foolishness Obito died. I'm sorry, sensei, Naruto said softly, mentally kicking herself for the foot and mouth. Kakashi was quiet for a while. It's okay, Naruto. I've gotten over his death, even if I can never forget him. He taught me a lesson about taking care of friends I can never forget. He continued in a slightly brighter voice. Anyways, what I was trying to say is that after the war one joined Anbu and drowned myself in missions till I almost lost contact with everyone else. So I guess Sensei had no chance to tell me about his expecting a child even if he had wanted to. I see, Naruto said quietly. Yeah, he was a fair sensei, almost like a father to me during the time I was in his team. I wish you could have met him. Naruto idly twirled her finger around the mouth of her teacup. I wish I could have met him, too. And my mother, Otusan, Okasan, she said softly in a voice thick with longing. And he ended up getting all wet because Obito had grabbed onto his leg when I kicked him into the river, chuckled Kakashi. Naruto laughed loudly. Sasuke entered the kitchen quietly and stepped to the fridge. Kakashi was telling another story about someone he presumed was Naruto's father. He frowned as he looked into the fridge. It was empty. It was already lunchtime, and they had nothing edible in the house. Sasuke closed the fridge door in annoyance and stepped to the sink to drink a glass of water. Naruto laughed at Kakashi's story. Her father definitely sounded like a fun person to know, even if he was usually serious most of the time, from what Kakashi said. Her stomach grumbled loudly. She grinned sheepishly at the silver-haired man. When was the last time you ate, Naruto? Kakashi asked, narrowing his visible eye at her in mock severity. Last night, I think, Naruto replied hesitantly, scratching the back of her head while tilting her head to the side and squinting thoughtfully. Kakashi shook his head in exasperation. You really need to learn to take care of yourself, Naruto, Kakashi scolded lightly. How are you going to manage your genin if you can't manage yourself? Sasuke rinsed his glass quietly while listening to the two talk. I can manage myself just fine. Naruto exclaimed. I just forgot about breakfast, and lunch, and dinner, and breakfast again, that's all. Kakashi rolled his visible eye at her. Exactly. Naruto grinned at him, then something struck her. What do you mean, my genin? Kakashi made a noise in the back of his throat. Naruto narrowed her eyes at the man. Do you know something I don't? Kakashi merely slouched and shoved his hands in his pockets. He gave her a happy eye crescent. How did your meeting with Tsunade-sama go? He asked instead, in a mischievous tone. Naruto frowned poutingly. Meeting with Tsunade Obachan, she said slowly, uncomprehendingly, then, Kuso. I forgot. Her eyes grew wide, and she slapped a hand to her forehead. Kakashi chuckled. I know you forgot, that's why she went me to check up on you. Kuso. Naruto said again, ignoring the grumbling of her stomach. She turned to Sasuke, who was about to leave the kitchen. Oi Sasuke, why didn't you remind me, huh? Sasuke looked coldly at her but didn't answer. Kakashi Tsked and Naruto glared at him, bastard. You really should be nicer to your beloved wife, Sasuke, he said lazily, ignoring Naruto's indignant squeak, and Sasuke's snort. And you really shouldn't be calling your husband that, Naruto. Naruto blew him a raspberry, and got a happy eye crescent in return. Ma, since we're all hungry, how does lunch sound? He said. Naruto immediately perked up. Ramen. Your treat, she said happily. Kakashi placed a finger against his chin and looked away from Naruto's puppy dog eyes. Alright. But just this once, he added as Naruto cheered. Don't start mooching off me like you do Iruka-san. Shameless, really, Kakashi said, teasingly. Naruto beamed at him. Shameless is right. Iruka-tusan doesn't mind me taking advantage of his kindness. She ran a hand through her hair and winced at its stiffness. Ayame Nichan had been really generous with the hairspray. I need a bath first, though. I feel filthy, and my hair's stiff enough to stop a kunai. The blonde stood shakily, and almost fell against the table. Kakashi almost got out of his chair to help her, but she waved him away. I'm fine, Kaka-sensei. Just a little tired, that's all. She made her way out of the kitchen, past Sasuke who was leaning against the fridge. You could treat her better, Sasuke, Kakashi said after hearing Naruto close the bathroom door and start bathing. Sasuke didn't reply, and went out of the kitchen into the hall, where he seated himself on the couch with a jutsu scroll in hand. Kakashi followed the brunette lazily and plopped into the sofa opposite. She is doing this for you, after all. You should be grateful for the chance to kill Itachi, and at least be nicer to her, Kakashi said after a while. Sasuke ignored him. Don't sever this bond, Sasuke. You're important enough to Naruto for her to agree to this. She's grown stronger, and asking for help is not a sign of weakness. Sasuke looked at the Junin in annoyance. Killing that man is my duty and my duty alone. Are you finished? He asked, his last sentence more a statement than question. Kakashi's eye curved up. For now, was the cheerful reply. Sasuke glared at him, then returned to the jutsu scroll. The two men sat in silence while waiting for Naruto. Kakashi noted with some surprise that he felt lighter than he had in years. He had never talked to anyone about Obito, Rin and Minato sensei before this, because the wound never really healed. But he realized that he felt somewhat better after reminiscing about the happier memories of his younger days with Naruto. It was rather therapeutic, and Kakashi felt more peaceful inside. Also, he could quite describe it, but he felt some positive emotions, relief, perhaps. That Minato sensei had left a legacy, someone to continue the Namikaze name and greatness. Naruto appeared quickly in a fresh t-shirt and shorts. Kakashi noted with mild interest that she kept her fingerless gloves on even though she was in her civvies, so to speak. He glanced at Sasuke's left hand, and wasn't surprised to see that the wedding ring wasn't there anymore. Kakashi sighed internally, but kept from remarking. Let's go, Kaka-sensei. I'm starved, Naruto said loudly as she put on her zori. Kakashi stood lazily and went towards the door. Naruto was already holding the door open in impatience. Oi Sasuke, let's go, Naruto called. The brunette looked up, face blank. Naruto rolled her eyes in exasperation. Come on, what are you waiting for, an invitation? Sasuke seemed undecided, glancing at Naruto, and at Kakashi, who was already out the door. He felt he was probably going to regret this later, but he finally put down the scroll and stood up. Yay! Hurry up, Tem! Naruto cheered, and walked rather shakily out the door. Sasuke took his time slipping his feet into his zori, and locked the door behind him. The blonde and the silver-haired man were already a few meters in front of him, Naruto chattering happily and Kakashi seemingly oblivious with his nose in the blue book, but Sasuke could tell from his body language that he was watching Naruto carefully, since she was still rather shaky. Sasuke kept his distance behind them, and started wondering idly who the Dobi's father was. Obviously Kakashi knew the man, from the way the Dobi was asking him earlier. The brunette shook his head mentally and abandoned his train of thought, because thinking of fathers reminded him of his own father, and how much he missed his family, and most importantly, it reminded him that he still hadn't killed that man. Ramen! Came the loud cry, and Sasuke awoke from his musings to find that they had arrived in front of the ramen stand, and the Dobi had already collapsed on the stool and sprawled bonelessly over the counter. His eye twitched a little as he regarded his wife. Definitely the most unfeminine girl he had ever come across. In a way he was pleased, because he couldn't stand behavior that was too simpering and girly. But it wouldn't hurt for her to learn some manners, at least. He shook his head a little, then contemplated whether to sit next to Kakashi, who had seated himself on Naruto's right, or to sit next to his wife. He decided to sit next to the blonde. Might as well get used to it. He had to live with the Dobi, after all. As soon as he sat down, the owner set a steaming bowl of the noodles in front of the blonde, who pushed herself off the counter and happily snapped her chopsticks apart. Ah, Sasuke-kun, right, I thought I recognized you. My, you've grown. It's good to have you back. It's been 6 years, hasn't it? The man said over Naruto's loud, "Itadakimasu." Sasuke just gave a curt nod. The man beamed at him. Naruto-kun here missed you a lot. You were all she could ever talk about whenever she came in here. Sasuke looked to his right out of the corner of his eye, and noticed Naruto was industriously slurping her ramen, and was obviously looking away from him. Beef ramen, he said shortly. The old man beamed at him again. One beef ramen for Sasuke. On the house, to celebrate your return from your training trip. He moved to Kakashi, who ordered pork ramen, and disappeared to the back of the stand to prepare the food. Training trip? He asked, placing his elbows on the counter and steepling his fingers. Yeah, that's what we told them so they wouldn't know you ran off to Oric, hey. Naruto's eyes widened, and she pointed her chopsticks at him. You talked. Sasuke glanced at her and frowned in disgust. Don't talk with your mouth full, Dobi. He was ignored, and Naruto nudged Kakashi. Did you hear that? He talked. All she got in reply was a gently chastising, don't talk with your mouth full, Naruto, as the man continued reading his Eki book, and giggling every once in a while. I was starting to think that snake did something to make you unable to talk or something. She said as she turned back to him and swallowed her mouthful. Sasuke's eye twitched. I see you're still as stupid as ever, Dobi. Hurt flashed through Naruto's eyes before they became carefully guarded. Don't call me that, Tem. She exclaimed loudly and waved her chopsticks at him. Sasuke grunted. Ujiratonkachi. Sasuke Yuru. Sasuke ignored her and started on the bowl of noodles placed in front of him. After fuming for a while, Naruto resumed her attack on her food. It was quite the shock to find out you were a girl, Naruto-kun. I couldn't believe Iruka-kun and Ayame-chan, at first, Tsuki said over the counter to Naruto. Naruto looked up and squinted at him. Hey. Well, it wasn't exactly my intention to delude anyone, she laughed sheepishly. Another bowl, Oji-san. Tsuki chuckled good-naturedly. Glad to see your appetite doesn't match your gender, Naruto-kun. Naruto looked affronted. Hey, girls can do everything guys can, and better too. She said loudly. Okay, maybe not everything, but girls are not weaker than boys. And I can prove that anytime. Sasuke snorted softly beside her, and she rounded on him. I can beat you anytime, Sasuke. You'd better not think I'm weak just because I'm a girl. Well, your voice definitely isn't weak like a girl's, he muttered, and raised his noodle-laden chopsticks to his mouth. Naruto grinned. I know, I'd hate to sound all squealy and girly. She said happily. I'd hate for you to sound girly, too, Sasuke thought, but didn't say anything. Now if only you weren't so loud. Naruto turned away from him to start on her second bowl. After her fourth bowl, she straightened with a satisfied sigh. Ah, she sighed, and burped loudly. Excuse me, man, I was hungry. Kakashi eyed the 4 large bowls stacked on the counter beside the blonde. I pity Iruka-san for having to constantly feed you ramen all these years. Naruto pouted. Cute, thought Sasuke, then he immediately slapped himself mentally. Where did that come from? Ah, don't be so mean, Kaka-sensei. I was really hungry today, 'cause I totally forgot about eating yesterday. Kakashi sighed as he pulled out his wallet, plucked out a few Ryu notes and left them on the counter. I'm just glad I don't have to feed you every day. That's Sasuke's job. From now on, he smiled brightly at them, or at least that's what they interpreted his crinkled eye to be. Naruto squawked indignantly, and Kakashi noted a faint pink on her lightly tanned cheeks. Sasuke just glared at him. He grinned under his mask. I'll leave you newlyweds to yourself. Yeah, and he shunshin Ed off. Naruto crossed her arms indignantly and stomped out of the stand, only to almost bump into someone. Ah, Sumimasen, Hinata-chan. Sasuke stepped out to see the Hyuga girl accompanied by a man he had never seen before. The black-haired man was dressed in clothes more befitting a samurai than a shinobi. But then again, not all shinobi wore the regulation uniform. Sasuke himself was sticking to his Odo garb, except that the bow had been tossed out and replaced by a dark blue obi having the Uchiha Uzumaki symbol embroidered at the ends. The loose white kimono-like shirt was easy for him to slip off when he wanted to use level 2 of the curse seal, so that his wings wouldn't have to tear through his clothes. And the epitome of unshinobi-like dressing was standing a little in front of him. Who the heck wore orange when shinobi were supposed to blend into their surroundings? Who's your friend, Hinata-chan? I've never seen you around, Naruto was saying as she looked curiously at the man beside the Hyuga. Hinata immediately blushed. This is Kajimura Takeshi. Takeshi-san, this is my friend Uchiha Uzumaki Kaime Naruto-kun. Naruto immediately offered the man a hand and a smile, both of which were accepted and returned. Visiting Konoha, Takeshi-san. Ah, well, Hinata spoke up quietly. Takeshi-san is the youngest son of Hai no Kuni's daimyo. Otusan, Hokage-sama and the daimyo arranged for our marriage. Naruto's eyes widened and her jaw dropped. Nani? Takeshi smiled politely at her. It is true, Uchiha Uzumaki-san. Hinata-san will be taking over as clan head in the future, and a marriage between the Hyuga clan and the Kajimura clan will benefit both the daimyo and Konohagakure no Sato immensely. Su-ka, you never told me, Hinata-chan. Naruto turned to her friend. Hinata blushed faintly. Ah, I was only informed of it this morning when Takeshi-san and the daimyo's envoys arrived in Konoha. Su-ka, so sudden. Naruto looked at Hinata sharply, but the girl offered her a calm smile to show she was alright. Naruto grinned at her. So where are you guys going? On a date. She waggled her eyebrows at them. Hinata blushed again, and Takeshi smiled a little shyly. Well, a date of sorts. I would like to get to know Hinata-san a little better. That's great, Naruto said happily, but she knew in her heart she was envious of Hinata. At least her husband-to-be doesn't have a stick up his, she thought moodily. I'm not exactly hoping for Sasuke to fall head over heels in love with me, but I do wish he would at least be my friend, nah. No need to hope for impossible things. It always hurts more when they don't come true. Outwardly she said, if you haven't had lunch yet you should eat here, Ichiraku ramen. The best ramen in all the elemental nations. Naruto grinned widely and gestured to the ramen stand. Hinata noticed Sasuke standing near the stand. Ah, Sasuke-san. Konnichiwa. Sasuke merely stared at her expressionlessly with his arms crossed. Takeshi looked a little affronted at the blatant unfriendliness towards his fiancée and was about to say something, but Hinata quickly cut in. Takeshi-san, this is Uchiha Uzumaki Sasuke-san, Naruto-kun's husband. Takeshi bowed stiffly. Hajimemashite, Uchiha Uzumaki-san. Sasuke didn't reply. Ah, we have to go, Hinata-chan, Takeshi-san. Gotta go get the stick out of his, Naruto said hurriedly, and was relieved when she saw both Takeshi and Hinata give her small, amused smiles. She quickly stepped over to Sasuke and grabbed his arm, and started dragging him away. See you around, Hinata-chan, Takeshi-san. Enjoy your date. Sasuke gripped Naruto's wrist and pulled her hand off his arm, and released her wrist like it was something unpleasant. Naruto turned to him angrily. What was that just now, Sasuke-tem? Sasuke merely crossed his arms and stared coldly at her. Why can't you be nicer to people? It wouldn't hurt, you know. How I want to treat others are none of your business, he stated coldly. Naruto glared angrily at him. It is my business since you're married to me. What's your problem? I know you're all Itachi Kili and all that, but it doesn't mean you have to be such a prick to everyone else. I don't intend to give the illusion of forging useless bonds. Gah, you're such a prick. Naruto fumed and balled her fists at her sides. She turned away from him and was about to walk off when Sasuke suddenly said something. Is this because you're jealous of Hyuga and the daimyo's son's date? The brunette asked. Naruto turned around to stare at him. What? You heard me, Sasuke said. His expression was hard. Don't expect me to do those sorts of things. I don't want to waste my time on trivial things, I have better things to do. I don't give a damn about this so-called marriage. You're nothing but Itachi bait to me. Hurt was evident for a second on Naruto's face before she schooled it into a neutral expression. Knowing you, I never expected anything from this marriage either. But I was hoping to have my friend back. Evidently, he's gone and you've come back in his stead. Sasuke sneered at her. I almost killed you, Dobi. That should have been indication enough about the level of our so-called friendship. Naruto breathed deeply and shoved her hands in her pockets, face to the ground. Her bangs and hair fell forward, hiding her face from Sasuke's view. Yeah, it should have. But then again, I've always been an idiot, haven't I? To me, you were my best friend, the person that acknowledged me even if only when we were fighting and arguing, someone that I looked up to, however reluctantly. I agreed to this plan of the council's for your sake, Sasuke. So what if they threatened not to support my nomination as Hokage? I would have found other ways, and proven to them that I am the best for the job. I did this because I wanted you to be safe in Konoha, and have the chance of fulfilling your dream of killing Itachi, although I would warn you that revenge isn't worth living for. She raised her head, but her bangs shadowed her eyes. Her lips curled into a wistful smile, but she kept her voice neutral. But to you I'm nothing but Itachi bait, Nothing but the dead last. Sasuke watched as Naruto walked away sadly in the direction of their apartment. Inexplicably, he felt guilty for what he had said, and for how hurt Naruto obviously was. He ground his teeth in irritation. I won't feel guilty, he thought harshly. I'm an Avenger, I don't walk down the same path as the others with their friendships and bonds. I don't care about what she feels, or what she thinks. She is Itachi bait, a tool. Nothing more, nothing less.